Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa on France 24. I'm Fraser Jackson. Here are the stories making headlines across the continent this evening. As African countries at the COP27 climate summit say wealthy nations haven't done enough to stop them from having to develop their oil industries, we'll ask how renewable sources can be used to lift people out of poverty on the African continent. Thousands of public workers across South Africa walk off the job as they look to secure a pay increase. The country's largest union is demanding over double the raise offered by the government. And Sadio Mane may be one of the world's best and most famous footballers, but his community work in his Senegalese hometown is what is endearing him to the locals. Our team takes a look. It's good to have you with us. This year's COP27 climate summit is continuing in Egypt, and on Thursday, multiple African countries said they must be allowed to expand their fossil fuel resources to lift their populations out of poverty. As the world looks to move toward green energies, Namibia's petroleum commissioner said wealthy countries had failed to provide sufficient compensation to persuade countries to leave polluting resources in the ground. Well, joining me now to discuss all things climate is Dr. Amir Ledouy, a lecturer at SOAS in London, an economist and a member of the Africa Transitions Group. Dr. Ledouy, thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. You heard me say that countries say that they need to develop their oil industries to lift people out of poverty. As an economist, what's the alternative? How can renewable energies be used as a tool to improve the economic situation in countries in Africa?
Hello, and thanks for having me over. It's a pleasure to speak about such an important issue. So today, Africa is mostly being perceived as a source of raw materials to fuel the global energy transition, with little attention being paid to what can be done to use renewables as a lever of industrial development. So in the context of a COP being an African COP, many things can be done, right? It's important to shift the narrative in terms of how renewables can play such role, and especially talking about how it can support the much needed industrial development and economic diversification across the continent. And it can be done especially by creating jobs, ensuring that renewables are not just imported technologies from industrialized countries, but making sure that renewables also serve to decarbonize industries and services, thereby creating job opportunities for people who are out of the job market in Africa. There's about 12 million jobs created in renewables in the world. A tiny fraction is in Africa. Most of them are in China, the USA, and the EU. So moving forward, it's very important to think about those considerations.
Well, we've seen some countries on the continent looking to make that transition. Yesterday, France and Germany agreed to loan South Africa 600 million euros to support their green transition. The World Bank, however, said it would cost the country 500 billion to become carbon neutral. How big is the challenge facing the continent to tackle climate change then?
The challenge is considerable, and the amount of financing that Africa has received so far, sure, I mean, it's not bad, but it's definitely not good enough compared to the amount that is needed. Just to give a little bit of perspective, without such financing, Africa at the moment it's estimated that the economic losses that are induced by climate change amount to about $40 billion per year, right? So this financing needs to be scaled up, but the financing is also about the quality of the financing. It shouldn't just be about expanding renewables, but also making sure that those countries are receiving financing to be able to build the productive capabilities to produce renewable energy technology themselves. You're right that at COP there is a bit more discussions now on financing towards Africa, including loss and damages. But hopefully next week we will see a lot more of that scaled up to other countries on the continent.
What, in your opinion, then, can the international community do to help the continent with this green transition? Is it just a case of giving them more investment, or are there other things that other countries could be doing as well?
As you mentioned, one part is investment, but it goes much broader. A big part has to do with trade agreements. So many of the trade agreements being signed at the moment don't really allow for technology transfer of renewable energy technologies towards the African continent. And a lot more can be done as well to help those countries build the capabilities around the renewables. And it also has to do with R&D support, with helping with business incubation services, but also ensuring that supply chains are regional supply chains, right? There's something else to do at the international level. Is that financing is one thing, but even when it comes to fossil fuels, you have countries like the USA and Canada that are not providing as much finance as they should, but also producing a lot more fossil fuels than they should, but requiring African countries to stop investing in fossil fuels. So I think a lot can be done, but most importantly, supporting national and regional actors at the moment that are emerging in Africa to support this agenda, including the Africa Climate Foundation.
Just briefly then, if you would, how important are events like COP27 in allowing countries to meet each other to discuss these kind of possibilities, these partnerships?
Look, I think these events are important to be able to establish a dialogue. However, I don't think that those events really take into account African needs and African narratives in terms of how the global decarbonization agenda can help them. And I think we see it in the preparation of the COP, we see it during the COP, and we also see it after, when even what's being agreed upon is being rarely respected. So as we talk about, the global Green New Deal, it's also important to think about what do Africans really want out of global decarbonization goals, and perhaps how they can support an African Green Deal in that regard.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Amir Labdoui, thank you for joining us here on France 24. Well, in other news, thousands of public workers in South Africa put down their tools on Thursday and walked off the job after pay discussions with the government broke down. The Labour Ministry has said it would implement a 3% pay increase, but unions want more, as Lauren Berstecker reports.
Downing their tools to show the government they mean business. Thousands of public workers went on a one-day strike in Johannesburg and other South African cities to demand what they say is a necessary pay raise.
We want these monies to be paid to us because still there are still salary disparities in this city of Johannesburg.
The strike was called by the Public Servants Association, one of the country's largest labor unions, after talks over a public sector wage hike recently hit a wall. Faced with the stalemate, the government announced last week it would unilaterally implement a 3% salary increase across the board. Unions, meanwhile, are asking for a 6.5% raise, a number they say barely makes up for inflation, which recently peaked at nearly 8%.
The past 2 years, we've been affected by COVID. Food is increasing on daily basis, clothes are increasing on daily basis. But to find that same workers, they're still earning the same salary in the past 5 years.
The government has repeatedly said it couldn't afford more than a 3% increase, but unions hope it can revisit that stance. Last month, South African rail and port workers launched a weeks-long strike over pay, which cost an estimated 44 million euros a day.
A jailed Egyptian activist has been given a medical intervention by prison staff after he refused to drink water for the last 5 days. Ala Abdel Fattah has been on a 100-calorie-a-day hunger strike for 6 months, but on Sunday escalated his actions by refusing to drink, a date which coincided with Egypt's hosting of the COP27 climate summit. His family are trying desperately to speak to him, but despite a court order, the prison is refusing to allow access. Abdel Fattah rose to prominence during the Arab Spring, and his criticism of authoritarianism has seen him spend much of the last decade behind bars. Late on Thursday, a medical report showed the British Egyptian activist was in, quote, good health. Elon Musk continues to make headlines after his recent takeover of social media platform Twitter. Now, the world's richest man is said to be laying off staff in the company's only bureau in Africa in a bid to cut costs. The BBC is reporting that 20 or so people who work in the Ghana office received an email terminating their employment by the 4th of December. And according to one worker, no severance package has been offered. If true, Twitter's actions would go against local employment law, which states employees must be given 3 months' notice and paid redundancy. 5 African teams are heading to the FIFA World Cup in Qatar later this month, but Senegal is likely to have the best chance of making serious progress in the tournament, thanks in part to national hero Sadio Mane. The Bayern Munich forward is revered in his home country, not just for his footballing skill, but also his community work. Our team report.
This pitch is where Sadio Mane took his first ever touch of a football. Dozens of young footballers play here every day, hoping to become professionals themselves. 16-year-old Sadio Mane is among the most talented.
I would like to become a great player, most of all to help my family and my village, like Sadio Mane.
Sadio Mane has inspired a generation. His good works in the village of Bambali won him the inaugural Socrates Award at this year's Ballon d'Or ceremony. He paid for a high school with space for 800 students, a 4G tower to connect the village to the rest of the world, and most importantly, a health centre to treat patients in this remote part of southern Senegal.
Sadio did not forget his village. After earning billions, he thought of us immediately. When he saw that the village had a problem, he built this hospital. It's an act worth praising.
Before, we had to travel 20 kilometers to get treatment. Now, thanks to Sadio Mane, we have a hospital.
Mane's family home, people still gather to watch him play for Bayern Munich on TV. Few are surprised by the footballer's generosity.
I grew up with Sadio. He's always been someone with a big heart. He always wanted to succeed in life, to help others. He really is an exceptional person.
Senegal's first World Cup match is against the Netherlands on November 20th. Should he be fit to play, the hopes of Bambali and the entire nation will be resting on Sadio Mane's shoulders.
That's it for this edition. Stay tuned to France 24.